that we have to leave after this week and go back to our normal lives. Boys and girls, I've got some great stories picked out for our last story time. I have Flat Stanley books. Do you know who Flat Stanley is? He got squished by a bulletin board and he's thin. I think he's 1 inch thin. The first book is Flat Stanley Goes Camping. Flat Stanley Goes Camping. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about 1 foot wide, and 1/2 inch thick. He had been flat ever since the bulletin board fell on him. There were lots of good things about being flat. Stanley could put on sunscreen in 1 swipe. Stanley had the best back float at the pool. Stanley had the loudest belly flop too, but sometimes it was hard being the only flat kid in town. "I'm sick of being flat," said Stanley one morning. "Flat is lame." "Lame," said Mrs. Lambchop. "Why, some of the best things in the world are flat." "Like the newspaper," said Mr. Lambchop. "And fried eggs and pancakes and bacon," said Arthur. "I guess so," said Stanley. After breakfast, Mr. Lambchop started loading up the car with tents and sleeping bags. "What's going on?" asked Arthur. "We're going camping," said Mrs. Lambchop. "This family needs some fresh air." "All right," yelled Arthur. Stanley barely smiled. After a short drive, the Lambchops arrived at the Houran River campground. Stanley was helpful as usual. He helped carry the wood. Stanley blocked the wind so his mother could start a fire. But Stanley just wasn't himself. He wouldn't even eat any s'mores. "Too flat," he muttered. "Why don't you two go exploring?" suggested Mrs. Lambchop. "Good idea," said Mrs. Lambchop. "Just don't get lost or fall off a cliff or touch any poison ivy. Have fun, dears." Stanley and Arthur set out. "Hey, animal tracks," said Arthur. "Let's follow them." The boys followed the tracks along the river through some trees and up a steep hill with a cliff on one side. "The tracks end here," said Arthur. He peered over the cliff. "I wonder what kind of animal made them." Arthur," said Stanley. Arthur turned around. "Skunk," he whispered. "Let's get out of here." But the boys were trapped. The skunk was on one side, the cliff was on the other. Then the skunk raised its tail. "What do we do?" Arthur wailed. "Mom said not to fall off a cliff," said Stanley. "She didn't say not to jump off." Suddenly Stanley grabbed Arthur by both hands and jumped. "Ah!" Arthur screamed. Then Arthur opened his eyes. He wasn't falling, he was sailing. Above him, Stanley's body made the perfect parachute. The boy landed with a gentle plop. "That was awesome," said Arthur. "Thanks," said Stanley. "Now where are we?" Arthur and Stanley looked around. All they saw were trees. "We're lost," said Arthur, "and it's getting dark." Then Stanley spotted something. "There's the river," he said. "Our campground is on the river." The boys ran to the water's edge. About a mile downstream were 2 cozy Lambchop tents. "What can we do? It'll be dark before we can walk the far," said Arthur. "I know," said Stanley. Stanley got a running start with belly flopped into the river. Splash. Then he flipped over onto his back. "Climb on! Woo-hoo!" cried Arthur. "I always wanted to go rafting." Arthur and Stanley made it back to camp, drippy but safe. "Let's keep this to ourselves," said Stanley. "I can't believe we got lost and went off a cliff," Arthur said. "At least we didn't touch poison ivy." "There you are," said Mrs. Lambchop, just in time for supper. That night, Arthur whispered to Stanley from the sleeping bag. "You know, if you weren't flat, you couldn't have saved us today." Stanley smiled. "Maybe being flat isn't so lame," he said. And then next day, Stanley found out another good thing about being flat. He could put on poison ivy cream in 1 swipe. Hey, are you ready for the next 3? I hope you enjoy Flat Stanley. The next book is another Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley and the Bees. This is a good summer book. Flat Stanley and the bees. Stanley Laptop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since a bulletin board fell on him. Being flat didn't stop Silly from eating just as much as a regular shaped boy. Are the honey buns done? He asked one summer afternoon. Not yet, said Mrs. Lambchop. I don't know why I'm baking. It's too hot today. We'll cool you off, said Mr. Lambchop. Boys, let's do the fan. Stanley flung himself on the floor, and Arthur folded him up like an accordion. Then Mrs. Lambchop grabbed Stanley by the ankles and flapped him back and forth. Whoosh! Much better, said Mrs. Lambchop. Run outside and play, boys. I'll let you know when the buns are done. Let's go, said Stanley. We can use our new slippy slide. Stanley loved the slippy slide. He always slid fast and faster than anyone else. Outside, Stanley and Arthur spotted Tom and Sam from down the street. Want to slide, called Arthur. Sure, said Tom. Let's play tag, said Sam after a while. Okay, said Stanley, you're it. Stanley loved tag, too. He could bend and twist so he was almost impossible to catch. How about hide and seek, Tom suggested next. That was Stanley's favorite game of all. He fit into the best hiding places. This is perfect, Stanley thought, curling up inside a tire swing. No one will ever find me. Then he heard a sound. Beep, someone cried. Stanley leaned out of the swing. Found you, said Arthur. No, you didn't, said Stanley. Don't you hear that sound? I think someone's in trouble. The boys listened. Eek, came the cry again. Stanley and Arthur followed the sound up a hill. Sam hurried after them. What's going on, Sam asked. Before Stanley could answer, he heard another sound, an angry sound. Bzzz! Oh no, said Arthur, it's Tom. Their friend stood like a statue, too scared to move. A swarm of bees buzzed around him. I was hiding behind a tree, Tom squeaked. I must have bumped a beehive. Eek! Arthur yelled Stanley, let's do the fan. Got it, Arthur said. Stanley flung himself upon the grass. Arthur folded him up like an accordion. Then Arthur grabbed Stanley by the ankles and tried to flap him up and down, but he couldn't do it. Stanley was too heavy. Sam rushed over to help. 1, 2, 3, flat, Arthur called. Together they fanned Stanley with all their might. Whoosh! The blast of air blew the bees away, but not very far. The boys took off down the hill. The bees came after them. They're catching up, Tom yelled. Then Stanley saw something, the slippy slide. Stanley let the others sit on top of him. Whiz! They sailed along and landed with a wet plop at the Lambchop's back door. The boys raced inside. So did the bees. Here they come, moaned Arthur. Eek, squeaked Tom, but then the swarm swerved. What? Where? Began Stanley. Then he gasped, the honey buns. Sure enough, the sweet sticky buns were covered in sweet sticky bees. Oh dear, cried Mrs. Lambchop, walking into the kitchen. Then Mrs. Lambchop started to laugh. It is too hot for warm buns anyways. You know what we need, boys? Ice cream. I hope you enjoyed Flat Stanley and the Bees. The next book is Flat Stanley, Show and Tell of Flat Stanley. You know, in 4 weeks you'll all be going back to school, so you'll have a lot to tell your friends about Show and Tell this summertime. Show and Tell Flat Stanley. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since the bulletin board fell on him. Stanley's family was used to being flat. They didn't think much about it, except when Mr. Lambchop needed to clean behind the fridge, or when Mr. Lambchop forgot his house key, which happened quite a bit. To the Lambchops, Stanley was perfectly normal. That's why Stanley was surprised when Arthur asked, "Can I take you to Show and Tell?" Stanley frowned. "You mean because so good it would win your ears?" said Arthur. "Miss Plum really wants to see it." Oh, said Stanley. Sure, Miss Plum said so. Stanley felt his face turning pink. It always turned pink when Miss Plum's name came up. Miss Plum was the prettiest teacher in the whole school. Thanks, Stanley, said Arthur. No problem, said Stanley. That's what brothers are for. Arthur smiled to himself. He knew the real reason Stanley was going to show and tell, but he didn't say a word. At school, Arthur's classmates took turns showing and telling. Sophie showed her mouse squeakers. He just loved cheese, she said. Manny held up his grandpa's false teeth. My grandpa loves cheese, too. Arthur introduced Stanley, who wiggled his ears like crazy. My goodness, said Miss Plum. Today I have something for show and tell, too, Miss Plum added shyly. She held out her left finger. A big ring sparkled on her finger. I'm getting married, said Miss Plum. Stanley felt his heart sink. Miss Plum married? The other kids jumped up and crowded around to look at Miss Plum's ring. Let me see, said Sophie. She bumped into Manny. Squeaker slipped out of his hands. Ouch, said Manny, watch it. He dropped his grandpa's teeth. The false teeth bounced twice, then clamped on Squeaker's tail. Squeak, squeak, squeakers. He took off running. Oh dear, cried Miss Plum. She reached out to grab Squeakers, and his new ring flew off her finger. To Stanley, the ring seemed to move in slow motion. He watched it sail towards Squeakers and fall straight down over the mouse's head, where it landed like a sparkly collar around his neck. Poor Squeaker squeaked to ground and ran even faster. He zip-sallied across the classroom, scampered up the bookcase, and vanished through a crack in the ceiling tile. My mouse, cried Sophie. My grandpa's teeth, cried Manny. My ring, cried Miss Plum. Stanley stood up. I'll save you, Miss Plum. I'll save your ring and Squeakers and the teeth. Stanley raced to the spot where Squeakers had vanished. Arthur, he said, the crack in the ceiling. It's like our window at home. Give me a boost. When the count to three, said Arthur. 1, 2, 3, with a grunt. Arthur pushed Stanley high over his head, just as he had a dozen times before. Mr. Lambtrap really did forget his keys a lot. Stanley slid through the scrap. I see Squeakers, Stanley yelled. Come here, boy, come here. Before the students heard crashing and thrashing, as Stanley chased the mouse over their heads. Go, Stanley, go, yelled Manny. It's no use, Stanley said Pammy. He's too fast. Then Arthur thought of something. Sophie, where's Squeaker's cheese? Right here, she said. Arthur grabbed a slice and flung it through the crack. Stanley, try this. The crashing stopped, the thrashing stopped, and the class saw Stanley's arms poke through a ceiling crack. Squeaker sat in his hand, happily nibbling the cheese. Stanley's other arm poked out. The false tooth in the ring dangled from his fingers. Last of all came Stanley himself, stretching out of the crack like a boy-sized strip of taffy. Oh, Stanley, said Miss Plum, once he was safely on the ground. You're my hero. She gave Stanley a big hug. Stanley felt his face turn pink, bright pink. What's wrong with Stanley? Asked Sophie. Arthur grinned. His face always turns pink when... Then Arthur stopped. He looked at Stanley. When he's been wiggling his ears, he said. Thanks, Arthur, whispered Stanley. No problems, Arthur. That's what brothers are for. Did you like that book? I hope you did. And the last book is Flat Stanley and the Lost Treasure. This time, Flat Stanley goes under the sea. Flat Stanley and the Lost Treasure. Stanley Lambtrap lived with his mother's father and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since a moving board fell on him. Sometimes being flat was great, especially on trips. Stanley could fold himself up and get comfy anywhere. Stanley could roll himself up and catch a ride too. I wouldn't mind a ride, grumbled Arthur. But being flat on the beach was a pain in the neck, and the leg, and the arm. Ouch, cried Stanley. That's the 3rd time I've been stepped on today. Stanley brushed off the sand. Let's do something else, he said to Arthur. Want to go snorkeling? Sure, said Arthur. Stay in the cold, Mrs. Lambtrap called. Okay, the boys agreed, pulling on their masks. Stanley splashed into the sea. Last one in is a rotten egg. No fear, said Arthur. You don't have to put on fins. Stanley groaned. It's not my fault. I have them built in. Stanley's flat feet helped him swim faster than Arthur, but he didn't mind slowing down. There was so much to see. Stanley spotted a school of bright blue fish. Arthur pointed out a stingray. Hey, it's flat like you, he cried to say, but it sounded like glub, 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 glub. A small silver dolphin sit by Stanley. He whirled around and swam back, so close he could almost touch it. Swish. The dolphin raced ahead again. It looked back at the boys as if it wanted them to come along. Stanley looked at Arthur. Arthur nodded eagerly. The boys kicked hard and followed the dolphin to the end of the cove. Below them, the ocean floor dipped. There, nestled on the bottom, lay an old ship. The dolphin dived down. The boys took deep breaths and dived too. They couldn't believe what they saw. The ship's sails were torn, its nets were tangled, but in the middle of the wreck was a chest of gleaming gold. Stanley kicked back to the surface. Arthur's head popped up next to him. Did you see that? Arthur cried. Let's grab a bunch of gold. We'll be rich. Hold on, said Stanley. That treasure must belong to somebody. Let's take one piece to show everyone. Then we'll figure out what to do. Okay, said Arthur. Just then a wave slapped Stanley, then another. It's getting choppy, he said. I think it's going to storm. Wait here, Arthur. I'll hurry and get the gold. Stanley dived to the ship again. He picked up a gold bar. It was the size of a candy bar, but much heavier. He slid it into the pocket of his trunks. Stanley was about to head back up when he saw the dolphin. Its tail was caught in the old fishing net on the ship. I've got to help, thought Stanley, before we both run out of breath. Quickly, Stanley rolled himself up. He tried to slide through a hole in the net, but something got stuck, the gold bar. Stanley yanked it out of his pocket and tossed it away. Now Stanley fit easily into the net. He used his flat fingers to pry the rope off the dolphin's tail. The little dolphin was free. A second later, Stanley burst out of the water. He took a big gulp of fresh air. Beside him, the dolphin whistled softly. You're welcome, said Stanley. Stanley yelled Arthur, help! The water wasn't just choppy now. The wind was whipping it into wild waves. Jump on, Arthur, Stanley called. He threw himself on a wave like a surfboard. Woo-hoo, cried Arthur. The boys rode the waves all the way to shore. By morning, the storm had passed. Stanley and Arthur took their parents to see the shipwreck. It was here, really, said Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop peered into the water. The bottom of the cove was empty. No ship in sight, not a trace. Perhaps the storm carried her away, said Mr. Lambchop kindly, but Stanley could tell she was doubtful. Too bad you didn't keep that gold, muttered Arthur. Then we'd have proof. Stanley heard a whistle. Hello there, dolphin, he called. The little dolphin whistled again. Then it flipped its nose. Something shiny flew through the air. Stanley reached out and caught it. Stanley smiled. Did someone say something about gold? I hope I have you interested in Flat Stanley, and I hope you go to your local library when you get home from Camp Read-A-Lot and take out some Flat Stanley books. Because it's the last one, I'm going to sing a goodbye song, and I hope tears don't come to my eyes. Goodbye, children. Goodbye, children. Goodbye, children. I'm sad to see you go. Farewell, children. Farewell, children. Farewell, children. I'm sad to see you go. I'm going to turn out the light for the last time.